Welcome to the Crime Bowl podcast with Bill and Jill, where it's true crime, no bull. Like and subscribe. Thank you to all our loyal listeners. You guys are awesome. You really make this worthwhile. We appreciate your listening ear and your feedback. May you find peace in your hearts and in these streets. Let's start the show. All right, today's deep dive takes us into, well, a dark corner of human nature. It's where two seemingly separate lives become tragically intertwined. We're going to unpack the case of Aundria Bowman,
Okay.
a 14-year-old who vanished from her Michigan home in 1989, a case that went ice cold for decades.
Wow.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The answers finally came in 2020, but not from some, new clue or witness.
Oh.
They came from a confession
Oh, wow.
linked to a completely different cold case, a murder from years earlier and states away.
It really is a tangled web we're about to unravel, and it all hinges on one man, Dennis Bowman. For Aundria's family, imagine living with that gaping hole of not knowing for over 30 years,
Right.
only to find out it was connected to another horrific crime they never even knew about.
Exactly. So for anyone who needs a quick refresher, Aundria disappeared on March 11th, 1989. Initially, there was that thought maybe she ran away.
Right.
But even back then, a lot of suspicion fell on her adopted father, Dennis. Now, flash forward to 2020. Dennis is already behind bars. Not for Aundria's disappearance, but for the 1980 murder of Kathleen O'Brien Doyle in Norfolk, Virginia.
Oh, wow.
And it's during that investigation, he drops the bombshell. He confesses to killing Aundria, too.
What's fascinating here is not just the confession itself, but the timeline. We're talking about a murder that happened before Aundria even vanished. This isn't just a tragic loss.
Yeah.
It points to a potential pattern of escalating violence, which is something we see sadly often in these types of cases.
Okay, let's rewind then and talk about Kathleen Doyle. Can you paint a picture of who she was and the circumstances of her murder?
Kathleen was a 25-year-old Navy wife.
Okay.
Picture this. It's September 11th, 1980. Her husband is deployed on the USS Eisenhower, serving our country. Then, the unimaginable happens. She's found murdered in her own home.
Oh my gosh.
The details are brutal. Sexual assault, stabbing, strangulation.
And just like with Aundria's case, Kathleen's murder goes cold for nearly 40 years.
Right.
Her family left with that same agonizing not knowing. It wasn't until the power of DNA technology, specifically advancements in analyzing old evidence, that investigators got a match pointing directly to Dennis Bowman.
This is where we see the ripple effect of cold case breakthroughs.
Yeah.
It's not just solving one crime, but potentially uncovering others.
Right.
Bowman is arrested in 2019, extradited from Michigan to Virginia to face charges for Kathleen's murder.
Right.
Then he makes that confession about Aundria.
A confession that leads investigators to Aundria's remains near his former property in Michigan.
Wow.
Imagine the heartbreak for her adoptive mother, Brenda. For years, she held on to hope maybe Aundria was alive somewhere, had started a new life.
Right.
This confession shattered that hope, confirmed their worst fears, and revealed a monstrous side to the man she loved.
And it raises so many questions about the years in between. We know Bowman had a prior conviction, same year as Kathleen's murder, for attempting to abduct a young woman at gunpoint in Michigan.
Oh, gosh.
It's a chilling glimpse into a pattern of behavior that seemingly escalated over time.
So we have this picture emerging of someone with a history of violence. Were there signs, red flags that people missed along the way?
There were reports of controlling and abusive behavior, but whether these were fully recognized or acted upon at the time is unclear. And here's a detail that's particularly gut-wrenching. Aundria herself had expressed fears about Bowman to friends and even school officials before she disappeared.
That's what makes this case so difficult to process. We have to ask ourselves, what could have been done differently?
Right.
Why weren't those warnings taken more seriously? It's a stark reminder that sometimes those who are most vulnerable need us to be their voice, to recognize the danger they might be in.
It's a haunting thought, and it really underscores the importance of listening to and believing those who are brave enough to come forward with their fears, especially when it comes to children. It's almost like Bowman's arrest for Kathleen's murder cracked open a dam of secrets.
Right.
Did the weight of his actions finally become too much to bear,
Yeah.
leading to the confession about Aundria? Was it a genuine pang of guilt or a more calculated move? These are questions that delve deep into the psychology of a killer.
It's fascinating and frankly disturbing to
Right.
consider what goes on in the mind of someone capable of these acts. Criminologists have spent lifetimes trying to understand what drives serial offenders.
Yeah.
And it's rarely a simple answer.
Exactly. There's no single profile that fits every case.
Right.
But what we can do is look for patterns, for those red flags that,
Yeah.
in hindsight, might have pointed to a dangerous escalation.
And Bowman's history, even before the murders,
Right.
certainly suggests that escalation. We had the attempted abduction, then Kathleen's murder, followed years later by Aundria's. It's terrifying to think how this pattern might have continued had he not been caught.
That's the truly chilling part, and it brings up a bigger issue. How do we, as a society, better identify these individuals before their actions escalate to such horrific levels? Is it about improving mental health resources,
Right.
being more attuned to warning signs, or a combination of factors?
We keep circling back to those missed warnings,
Yeah.
and it's so frustrating.
Right.
Andrea's fears, even shared with adults, weren't enough to protect her.
Right.
What does that say about how seriously we take those who are vulnerable, especially children, when they voice concerns about their safety?
It's a heartbreaking indictment of the systems that are supposed to protect them.
Right.
And makes you wonder how many other cases are out there where warning signs were missed or dismissed, leading to tragic outcomes?
It's a sobering thought. And it connects to a point you made earlier about DNA technology being a game changer for cold cases. Some argue it's become almost over-relied upon,
Right.
that the focus on forensic evidence overshadows good old-fashioned detective work.
Right.
What's your take on that?
It's true that DNA evidence has revolutionized investigations,
Right.
offering concrete proof that wasn't always available before. But you're right, it's not a magic bullet.
Right.
We still need investigators with the intuition, the persistence
Right.
to piece together the puzzle, even without that definitive scientific link.
In Kathleen's case, it was ultimately DNA that cracked the case wide open after 4 decades.
Right.
What was the specific advancement that allowed them to re-examine that old evidence and finally get a match to Bowman?
It's a technique called genetic genealogy. It involves comparing crime scene DNA to samples in public databases,
Okay.
looking for familial matches. Essentially, they can trace back through family trees, narrowing down the pool of potential suspects until they get a hit. It's like building a family tree in reverse, using DNA as the guide.
That's incredible. It's like something out of a science fiction movie, except it's real, and it's bringing justice to victims who might have otherwise been forgotten.
It's a powerful tool, but it also raises ethical questions about privacy and consent.
Right.
Imagine your DNA, submitted for a genealogy project,
Right.
being used to solve a crime you had nothing to do with.
Right.
It's a complex debate, but the benefits for cold case investigations are undeniable.
For families like Kathleen's, that closure, even after decades of waiting, must be immeasurable.
Yeah.
But knowing the perpetrators behind bars doesn't erase the pain or bring back the life that was lost.
Exactly. And it's important to acknowledge the ripple effects of these crimes.
Yeah.
Kathleen's murder, especially given her husband's military service, shook the entire community in Norfolk.
Right.
It shattered the sense of safety,
Right.
particularly for other military families.
You know, reading about that detail reminded me of a conversation I had with my neighbor a while back. Her father was in the military, and she talked about how every deployment brought a wave of anxiety, a fear that something terrible might happen while he was away.
Yeah.
It's a burden that military families carry, and a tragedy like Kathleen's case just amplifies those fears.
It highlights the human cost of these crimes, how they extend far beyond the immediate victim.
Right.
It's a trauma that ripples outward, affecting families, friends, and entire communities.
And we can't forget about Aundria and the impact her disappearance had on her community in Michigan.
Right.
Imagine the fear that gripped parents, the constant worry for their own children's safety.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that these cases aren't just abstract stories. They touch lives in very real and profound ways.
That's a powerful point. These are not just headlines or statistics. They are lives cut short, families forever altered.
Right.
And the healing process for everyone involved is long and complex.
So we have Dennis Bowman behind bars, serving multiple life sentences.
Right.
But what about the others affected by his actions? Aundria's adoptive mother, Brenda, for example. Reports indicate she remained dedicated to her marriage, even after his confessions and convictions. How do we even begin to comprehend that level of loyalty in the face of such horrific acts?
It's a question that gets to the heart of human psychology and the complexities of relationships. It's possible Brenda was caught in a cycle of abuse, manipulated and controlled by Bowman for so long that she couldn't break free.
Or maybe she was in denial,
Right.
desperately clinging to the image of the man she thought she knew, unable to reconcile that with the monster he turned out to be.
It's a stark reminder that domestic violence can be insidious. the psychological manipulation just as damaging as any physical abuse. It's crucial that we approach these situations with empathy and understanding, recognizing that leaving an abusive relationship is often incredibly difficult and dangerous.
It's a side of these cases we don't always get to explore, the long-lasting impact on those closest to the perpetrator. We often focus on the victims, and rightfully so.
Right.
But understanding the psychology of someone like Brenda, it adds another layer of complexity to this whole story.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that there are no easy answers, no simple explanations for the choices people make, especially when dealing with trauma and manipulation on such a profound level.
We've talked a lot about the investigative side of things, the DNA evidence, the confessions.
Yeah.
But what does justice actually look like in a case as complex as this? Is it purely about the sentence, or is there more to it?
That's a great question, and I think it depends on who you ask.
Right.
For some, it might be about seeing the perpetrator punished, knowing they're off the streets and unable to harm anyone else.
Right.
For others, it might be about finding answers, understanding why this happened, and preventing something similar from happening again.
In Bowman's case, he received multiple life sentences for both Kathleen and Aundria's murders.
Right.
But does that truly provide closure for the families? Can any legal outcome truly compensate for the loss of a loved one?
I think it's important to recognize that the legal system, while essential for holding perpetrators accountable, can't erase the pain and suffering caused by these crimes. Justice might involve a sense of validation, of knowing the truth and seeing the perpetrator held responsible.
Right.
But it doesn't bring back the victims or heal the emotional scars.
And for those who knew and loved Kathleen and Aundria, those scars run deep. Kathleen's husband, out at sea serving his country when she was murdered, the unimaginable grief he must have endured.
Right.
And Aundria's friends, the classmates who shared their fears about Bowman with her, the guilt and what-ifs that likely haunt them still.
It's a ripple effect of trauma, touching countless lives in ways we can't always see. And it underscores the importance of providing support and resources for those impacted by these crimes, not just the immediate families, but the wider circle of those who knew and loved the victims.
We often talk about closure in these cases, but is that even a realistic goal?
Yeah.
Can you ever truly close the chapter on such a horrific event, or is it something that continues to shape your life in ways you can't always predict?
I think that's a question each individual has to grapple with in their own way. For some, the legal outcome might provide a sense of closure, a feeling that justice has been served.
Right.
But for others, the wounds might never fully heal, the questions might linger, and the loss might continue to shape their lives in profound ways.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I keep coming back to those missed warnings about Bowman. What concrete steps can we take as individuals, as communities, to ensure those voices are heard and acted upon? What can we learn from these tragedies to prevent future heartbreak?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's something we all have a responsibility to consider.
Yeah.
It starts with fostering a culture of belief, where individuals, especially children, feel safe speaking up about abuse or concerns for their safety. It means educating ourselves about the signs of abuse,
Right.
both physical and emotional,
Right.
and being willing to intervene when we see something that doesn't seem right.
You know, I was reading an article recently about a program some schools are implementing where they teach kids about body safety and empower them to recognize and report inappropriate behavior.
Right.
It's a simple concept,
Yeah.
but it's about planting that seed early on
Right.
that their voices matter and they have the right to feel safe.
That's a fantastic initiative, and it highlights the need for a multifaceted approach.
Yeah.
We need to empower individuals, educate communities, and strengthen the systems that are designed to protect those most vulnerable.
And let's not forget the role of law enforcement. Are they adequately trained to recognize the signs of domestic violence? Are resources allocated effectively to investigate these cases thoroughly?
Those are critical questions, and they point to the need for ongoing evaluation and improvement within the systems that handle these situations. We can't just focus on punishing the perpetrators after the fact. We need to be proactive in preventing these tragedies from happening in the first place.
Well said. It's been a heavy but incredibly important conversation. Thank you for sharing your expertise and insights with us today.
My pleasure. It's a discussion we need to keep having to honor the victims and work toward a future where these stories become less frequent.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a truly heartbreaking case. May we all take something away from these tragedies, a renewed commitment to listening, to believing, and to speaking up for those who need our voices the most.
True crime, no bull.